What if you could predict your own future? Is it possible to predict your own future? I believe that it is, and some of you will understand that it is too, because some of you have actually gotten really, really close before. Some of you have uttered this phrase. Maybe it was under your breath. Maybe you were bold and you said it out loud. Maybe it just ran through your mind. But you were in a difficult situation after making various choices, and this came through your mind. You said, I should have seen it coming. I should have seen it coming. You kind of look back over it, and with a little hindsight, you could connect the dots, and you understand that that led to this, and that led to this, and here it is, and you think, man, I should have seen it coming. Some of you have done that. All of us have used a different version of that phrase. Usually, we use it in relationship to other people, to friends of ours, or maybe to your niece, or your nephew, or your kids, or your spouse. The phrase is just a little bit different. It says this, it says, you should have seen it coming. You should have seen it coming. Now, hopefully you don't say that to your spouse. We all hope someone else says that to our spouse, so we don't have to say it to our own spouse, right? Because that makes for a long night at home. But we can look into other people's lives, and isn't this true? It's almost like watching the train go down the tracks, and you know it's going to derail. Like, you know it. And a lot of times at those points, when we see this in somebody else's life and we know things are going to go off the tracks, we are making a judgment call about whether we're going to speak up or not speak up because we know where this is going. And after the fact, if we didn't say anything, we feel a little guilty. We even maybe apologize to them, and then we say, you know what? But you should have seen this coming. Because it's actually possible for you and for me to look into the future, to watch the direction that things are going and say, we know where this is going. And so it's kind of wild, isn't it? That sometimes people will say to you, you should have seen this coming. Sometimes you'll say it to someone else, you should have seen this coming. And the truth is, this is painful, sometimes we did see it coming. And we kind of turned our head away because we didn't want to look at that. And we kept going in the direction that we were going in, and then it landed us exactly where we knew it was going to land us. And someone should probably ask the question, when you knew that's where it was going, when you could predict your future like that, why did you keep going? Well, that's kind of the idea behind the next 3 weeks for us. I believe that if you're here over the full course of the next 3 weeks, you will have a chance with your own life to experience some very helpful things. You'll gain some insight so that you can see your future. You'll have the opportunity to reset some things so you can move in a new direction. And you'll actually have a guide to go with you so you have someone to follow. And if you embrace all this over the next 3 weeks, I believe the ending course of your life and some midpoint courses can end up in a substantially different place than the course that you're on right now. Now, because it's going to take us 3 weeks to go through all of this, I want to spend just a little bit of time at the very beginning here setting up some ideas and some principles that will be important for us all 3 weeks through this. And so this is a little bit of introductory material as we go through all 3 weeks. Let me start with this. I have some good news and some bad news. So what do you want first? The bad news, right? Well, I hope you do, because that's the next slide that's coming up on the screen. I didn't order them any other way. So now this is actually really bad news. It's such bad news that some of you might feel like you would want to get up and leave right after I say this. This is true news. It is bad news. I'm just trying to warn you. Here's the truth, the bad news. Most personal problems cannot be fixed. Most of your personal problems and most of my personal problems, they cannot be fixed. And anyone who tells you different is lying to you. How do I know this? Well, because you're not a car. You're not a computer. You're not a refrigerator. You're not a piece of machinery. You can fix cars and computers and appliances and machinery. When something goes wrong with your car, if you're in an accident, you go to the body shop, this is actually what you do. They fix it at the body shop, and then you inspect it because you want it to be just like new. If you have an electronic device and it's not working properly, a lot of times you can just unplug it, leave it unplugged for about 5 minutes, plug it back in, and it is like new. But the truth is, you are not a computer, and you are not a car. You're more complex than that. And your personal problems, honestly, cannot be fixed. You can learn from your past problems. A lot of us cope with our past problems. We wish we could reset our past problems. You can be forgiven from your past choices. But the truth that all of us recognize, I trust, is that the scars from your past will follow you around for the rest of your life. The consequences of the choices that you've made do not go away, even when you are cleansed and forgiven. Aren't you glad you came tonight? There's good news. Here's the good news. Most personal problems can be avoided. Most things that leave you with scars and consequences that you do not want, you can actually look into the future and you can avoid them. I mean, this is what happens when we're predicting other people's future. When we say, you should have seen it coming. A girl may come up to you, she's like, I can't believe he broke up with me. And you're like, he's been breaking up with you for 3 months. You should have seen that coming. People will say, I can't believe I got into such deep debt. And everyone around them is like, you've been spending and not controlling and not making, like you should have seen this coming all the way along. And you can't, once you end up in deep debt or once you end up in a scarred relationship, you can't fix that. There's not a way to fix it. But it was possible to avoid it on the front end. So that's good news and bad news. Let me give you then a concept that will carry us through these next 3 weeks about the idea of principles. Because there's a single principle that I'm going to ask you to explore over the next 3 weeks. And I first want us to think about the idea of principles, okay? So this is wisdom. Principles apply themselves to you. Now, I'm going to come back to the idea of wisdom later in the message. I just want you to see where it fits right here. But just think about what principles are for a few moments. Principles apply themselves to you. It's wisdom. It lives above other things. And let me try to describe this for you. Principles are not a rule that you follow. That's not what principles are. Actually, what happens is principles follow you around wherever you go. Principles are not a law that you can break. But if you don't pay attention to principles that are true, these principles will break you. Principles are not a choice that you apply. You don't get to apply principles. Remember, principles apply themselves to you. Now, I need you to really capture this because the single principle that we're going to live on over the next 3 weeks is going to apply itself to you over and over again. Let me go back to high school for some of us. Maybe, if you remember in high school, you probably learned a principle called Archimedes' principle, right? Anybody remember that? Nope, just me? Good. Even our high school students don't remember it. That's awesome. The Archimedes' principle explains why you're able to jump into Lake Michigan and why you're also able to float on Lake Michigan. Archimedes' principle is the principle of buoyancy. And Archimedes' principle applies itself to you whether you want it to or not. You don't get the chance to overcome Archimedes' principle. You don't get the chance to get away from Archimedes' principle. And sometimes, because you don't even know Archimedes, you might think, that's not fair. I don't even know Archimedes. Why is it that he gets to have so much power over my life? But this is just the way the world is. It's a principle that's true whether you want it to be true or not. It's the mathematical reason why, get this, pebbles sink and cruise ships float. And if you can harness the power of a principle that is true and will apply itself to your life, you get to live in a very wise way. Now, here's the thing about principles. They are not invented. They are discovered. They existed long before anyone realized what they were, but when they are discovered, then we start to get some explanation and some experience so that we can line up our experience with the reality of how the world works. They are experienced, but the question is, are they recognized? So, you've experienced Archimedes' principle before. The question is, did you recognize it? And the same is going to be true with the principle that I leave you with today. But maybe the most important thing about principles is this. Once you understand a principle that's true, that principle, since it's always true, can actually be leveraged to your benefit. It's why before Archimedes lived, 250 years before Christ, no one had figured out how to build a cruise ship or even the kind of boat that likely could make its way across the ocean. But once they understood the principle that was at work, you now can leverage that principle to do remarkable things. Or you can ignore a principle completely to your detriment. Because the principle doesn't care. It doesn't have feelings. It doesn't have compassion. The principle will apply itself to you. And so today, I want to give you the principle for how to predict your future. Now, before I get into how life works and the principle of that, I think it'll be easy to see maybe if we apply it to something simpler that we all experience. If you go on a drive or go on a hike, it's possible to have a path that you're on. It's possible also to get lost while you're driving or hiking. A number of years ago, my family, with my extended family, with Jenny's family, went up to a Cubs game. I don't know why we did that. But when we were I know why we did it. My in-laws are all Cubs fans. Can you believe that? Okay. So we had enough of us that we had to take two vehicles to the Cubs game. And when we're on the way home, I'm driving our van home, and my brother-in-law, Jenny's brother, is driving the other van behind us. Now, we live in Crown Point. We're going back to our house. We're going to come down, Skyway to I-65, no problem. Easy way home. So we're coming down the Skyway, and he had dropped behind me a little ways longer than I realized, actually, and it was dark outside. So, I just hop on I-65, and I come south, and I end up at our house, and pull in the garage. We start hanging out at home. Think, hey, 5 or 10 minutes, the other vehicle will be here. Like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, they don't show up. I'm like, did they stop to eat? Were they getting ice cream? What are they doing, right? And so, of course, we call them. And when I call him, I said, hey, where are you? He's like, well, we're still driving. I said, well, you see any signs? You could tell me? He's like, yeah, there's a sign coming up right here. It says, South Bend. Like, well, I'm going to go to bed, and we'll see you in the morning then. Now, listen to me. This is very important. So my brother-in-law was driving, and he was lost. But for a long time, this is very important, for a long time he was lost, and he didn't know he was lost. That's actually the way that lostness works. If you realized you were lost the moment you got lost, you would never get very lost. You would just be able to say, whoop, I back up about 10 feet, and then I'm on my way. But for about 40 minutes, he was going thinking he was on the right path, but he was actually lost the whole time. Now, he wished, when he realized he was lost, that we could just fix it. That we could somehow think there's a magical button that you could push, and instead of being in South Bend, he could be in Crown Point. But there aren't fixes for problems like that. There is no way to say, well, I know I ended up in South Bend, but I wanted to be in Crown Point, so now I'm in Crown Point. It never works that way. The only way to get back to where you wanted to be is to acknowledge that you were on the wrong path, reset an entire direction, and then spend your time getting back to where you wanted to be. He'll never get that time back. He'll get razzed by me for the rest of his life. That's the way this works. And here's the simple principle that's true in driving or in hiking or in life. Your direction determines your destination. Your direction determines your destination. And this word direction is very powerful. It's the way that you're actually going. It's your direction, not your intentions. My brother-in-law never intended to go to South Bend, and many of you never intended to end up in the ugly parts of life that you ended up in. It's not actually about our intentions, is it? We can intend for one thing and actually go in a different direction, and our intentions will have nothing to do with our destination. It's only our direction. Our dreams often have nothing to do with our destination. You have lots of dreams in your life, past and present, and just because you dreamed them has zero to do with whether you're going to experience or accomplish them. Because all the time, people dream that they want to be wealthy, and then they save no money at all. And it's what you're actually doing. It's actually the direction of your life that will result in your destination, not your dreams. Sometimes people feel like, but my feelings should get me somewhere, but your feelings get you nowhere. Your direction, not your feelings. Sometimes, hear your pastor say this, sometimes people think, my prayers will determine my destination. But I see this happen all the time where people pray for this and then they walk this direction. And I can tell you where they end up. It is not about what they pray. It's about what they actually do. This is the principle of life. And it will apply itself to you whether you want it to be true or not. You can leverage this principle for your benefit or you can ignore it to your detriment, but it is your direction, not your dreams, not your intentions, not your prayers, that will actually determine where you end up. And that's why you can predict your future. You just have to look at the actual course that you're on. Friends, this week, all over America, all over the world, people will walk into counselors' offices and walk into pastors' offices and walk into priests' offices and some walk into the living room of a good friend. And they'll start to tell their story of where they are in life and how ugly the situation is in their marriage or in their parenting or in their habits or in their identity. And when they walk into offices like mine, almost always the message is, and so I need to fix this. Maybe you, counselor, pastor, priest, friend, maybe you can fix me. And here's the problem. I can't fix you. You're not a car. You're not a computer. I can't unplug you and plug you in and say, look, it's not South Bend, it's Crown Point. Life does not work that way. I can be honest with you, and I can tell you that it actually doesn't matter what you intend or dream or feel or desire or even pray about. If you keep walking in the direction that you're walking, you are going to end up where you've ended up. With only a few exceptions and lots of nuance, the reason you are where you are in life right now is because you walked in that direction. And your direction will always determine your destination. And people come up to me and they say, Greg, young woman, come up to me. Greg, yeah, someday I want to have a godly marriage with a godly man, someone who would lead our family spiritually and we could raise our kids together. Someday I want that to be true. And I say, well, who are you dating right now? Well, it's just the last guy who asked me out. It's the last guy who expressed interest in me. I need a feeling. I need a date for prom. I need. And I always think it doesn't really matter what you dream of. What matters is the direction that you're going. I'll listen to moms and they'll say, hey, listen, I really want to value my husband. And after the kids are grown and gone, then I'll be able to give my attention to my husband. But for now, it's the kids. And I'm like, well, it doesn't really matter what you want someday. It matters what direction you're walking in right now. I talk to people all the time. Greg, once I make more money, then I'll be generous. Sure you will. No, you won't. You won't. We are and we become what we are doing, not what we say we want to do and then walk in the opposite direction. I talk to young dads who say, man, I want my family to live as a unit. We want to be together. We want to be devoted to each other. We want to invest in each other. We want to laugh together. And then they go work 70 hours a week. Like, it doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter what your dreams are or your intentions are or your prayers. It doesn't matter. If you're actually walking in the other direction, I can tell you where you're going to end up because it is your direction, not your intentions, that will actually determine your destination. And this is usually where it gets real quiet. Because all of us can look at our lives and say, yeah, I say I want it to be one way. But my choices, my direction, tells a different story. Well, here's the good news. If you change your direction, things will eventually change. Not immediately. It's not a button that you can push. But if you actually change the direction of your life, things will eventually change. How do I know this? Well, I'm glad you asked. I haven't even mentioned the Bible yet, have I? But Jesus, who's the wisest person who ever lived, talks about this principle with great clarity and with the fun of a little bit of a story. Jesus, when he walked the earth, had a variety of teachings that he did. One of the teachings, the longest teaching we have recorded, is in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. I mentioned it just a few weeks ago. I call it Jesus' Manifesto. Lots of people call it Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And it's kind of like his central teaching. It was probably a teaching that he did multiple places when he went. I mean, I can imagine that the disciples are like, oh, this one again, huh? That's the way it goes. But when he offered this teaching, it gave a lot of guidance for life. And then at the very end of that teaching, he tells what you might even call a parable. He's just giving us a metaphor to help understand the implications of all the guidance that he's given us. And I just, for a few moments, the great wisdom of Jesus, want to go line by line and help you see where I find this principle. He says this, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice. So this is the key, right? He's actually going to draw a contrast in a moment. He's going to say there's lots of people who hear these words of mine. There's lots of people who come to a religious setting and they hear a teacher talk and they understand that there's some things the teacher is saying that don't line up with their life, and then they feel guilty about it. But what people oftentimes, maybe this is your experience in church, they take that feeling of guilt as a religious experience, and they think, I needed to be in church this weekend. And then they actually change nothing in their life. Jesus says there's a whole crowd of people like that. A whole crowd of people who are going to hear everything that I just said, and they're not going to put it into practice. They have intentions, they have dreams, they have desires, they say prayers, but the definitive marker is everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice. Now, hear his promise. He says, will experience immediate relief relationally, financially, and spiritually. Isn't that awesome? You know Jesus didn't say that, right? Because it's not true. It's not true. Like the people who were listening to him were going to hear his words, and then they were going to put them into practice, and they were not going to experience immediate relief financially, spiritually, morally, relationally, marriagely, whatever it is. It doesn't work like that. How about this one? Anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice will have discovered the fix for all of their problems. That's not what he said either. He actually said something entirely different. Follow this. He says, whoever hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man. You've heard me describe wise men before, wise women, wise people. People who have wisdom understand that life is connected. They understand that yesterday is connected to today, and today is connected to tomorrow. Fools are the opposite of that. Fools think they can live however they want to live today and then perfectly reset, unplug, plug back in, and have the life they want in a different way tomorrow. Jesus says the wise man is like a wise man who built his house. Now, think about this idea of building your house just for a few moments. Some of you have faced a choice before. You're like, are we going to build a house or are we going to buy a house? Right? We faced that choice once. We decided to buy a house. You know why? Because we didn't want to take the time to build a house. Building a house takes time. Building a house takes foresight. Building a house takes decisions that you're making. And building a house means I start now and I don't see the results until later. That's what wise people do when they build their house. And by house, he of course just means your life. All of your life. Your life financially, your life morally, your life spiritually, your life professionally, your life in all of those alleys. And he says, a wise man hears these words of mine, puts them into practice, and builds his house on the rock. Now, if you thought building was going to take a while, getting to the point for them where you could build your house on the rock meant this is going to take a long while. Some of you see construction sites. Some of you are in construction right now. Doesn't this always fascinate you? When people just drive by construction sites, they can think for a long time that nothing's happening because all the work is going on underground. And then once the work starts above ground, it looks like it flies by. But the truth is, everyone who's in construction knows, no, a lot of work had to go in underground first. Because the foundation piece is really important. People who would skip the foundation piece and just, build it on the sand, the dirt. Like, you could do that. In fact, Jesus contrasts this. He says there's a different kind of person. He says, everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man. He's the person who doesn't understand that yesterday is connected to today and today is connected to tomorrow, and that consequences are coming for the decisions that I'm making today, good and bad. Foolish man is like the foolish man who built his house on the sand. Now, when Jesus was teaching this with a whole crowd around him, when he said, this guy built his house on the sand, the whole crowd probably would have went, what kind of idiot builds his house on the sand? Well, I'll tell you what kind of idiot builds his house on the sand. It's the kind of idiot who thinks that because the sun's shining today, it's not going to rain tomorrow. It's the kind of person who thinks whatever the weather is today, that's what the weather's going to be tomorrow. They think I can just hold on because the circumstances around me aren't going to change and things are going to be fine because I'm fine right now. But that's kind of the point. The weather does change. Situations come and go. And it says, the rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. And guess what? He should have seen it coming. It was totally predictable. This is cause and effect. This is reaping and sowing. These are all the principles that the scriptures teach us to say your direction, not your intention, determines your destination. This is not something you can build your life out on the sand where you can fix it today and you're clean tomorrow. That's not the way it works. People who do it that way have their lives crash and burn. And then he contrasts this with the wise man. So that happens with the wise man. It says, the rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall because those folks are so lucky. Isn't that what foolish people think? They think, oh, it's not fair. Why does it always work out for him? Why does it always work out for her? Why are they blessed and I'm not? They're so lucky. All while they're living their life in a certain direction and not paying one bit of attention to the foundation that was laid, the decisions that were made, the discipline that was employed, the direction that was set. That's not what he said. This is what he said. Because it had its foundation on the rock. And then in the very last summary verse of this whole Sermon on the Mount, this is what it says. I love this verse. It says, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority, not as their teachers of the law. Follow this with me. Jesus taught as one who had authority. That's not because he was a great public speaker or because he spoke with confidence. He was different than their other teachers because the other teachers had a lot of rules. The other teachers had a bunch of laws, teachers of the law. They said, do this, not that, do this, not that, do this, not that. And Jesus is bringing some wisdom to this, a bigger picture, something with some authority, and said, listen, I'm telling you, this is how life works. This is a principle of life. If you hear these words of mine and you put them into practice, you'll end up here. If you hear these words of mine and you do not put them into practice, you'll end up there. Because your direction, not your intentions, determine your destination. You can predict your future. Now let me say this before I finish today. I've been a pastor for a little over 20 years. And I'm not the same pastor that I was 20 years ago. Because I've watched lots of people's lives come in this church, and some people's lives go out of that church. I've watched lots of people's lives thrive in their walk with Christ and the raising of their families and the health of their marriages, and I've watched lots of people's lives who go the other direction. I used to do student ministry here, and I thought I'm going to work with high school students, and then I realized if I want to change high school students, I'm going to have to work with their parents because that's where the messed up stuff is coming from. And I used to think, when someone would come to me with their problems, the right thing to do was to help them feel better. To know they could be forgiven, to know that reset was possible, but just leave the conversation there. To not make it uncomfortable. To not call on them to make a significant change and live an entirely different direction. And I have a lot of regret as a pastor for staying away from the uncomfortable conversation to try to help everyone feel better, but not actually lead them to the direction that would lead to change. I've seen this play out in my life. I've seen it play out in my extended family's life. I've seen it play out in some of your lives. That it's your direction. It's the choices you're making. It's the call to reset and be disciplined and move in an entirely different direction that is absolutely necessary so you don't end up where you don't want to be. And if I feel that, I think it's because Jesus felt that he cares too much for you. To just be nice about it all. To just give a few self-help principles and set you on your way and say it'll be okay, because it won't be okay. To act as if you can be cleansed, but just keep doing the same things, and that's going to work out fine, because it's not going to work out fine. And this is the power of who Jesus is. That because of his love for you, because he knows how the world worked, he created it, he knows that your direction is what determines your destination. He wants to lead you somewhere else. And it's why around here, what I almost always come back to from Jesus' words to you is the calling that he gave to his disciples, where he simply says, "Come, follow me." This isn't yet even a calling to come believe in me. You don't have to believe in him to start following him. This isn't him just saying, stop it, or get it together, or whatever. He's showing you a way to live that leads you to where you want to be. And he says, you can follow me there. And so next weekend, I'm going to carry this message forward on that basis. To say, what would it look like if you could predict your future? To actually attach yourself to a guide for you to follow. Will you stand with me right now? I'm going to pray for us, and then we'll go. God, thanks for your love for us, for the wisdom and the conviction that comes with Jesus' teaching. God, I pray that on this day, you will help us to see clearly the path that we're on, the direction we're going, and the destination in front of us. And give us the power to decide if that's where we actually want to be. In Jesus' name, amen.